Sisters and young people and friends, it is the first day of the week, and the Apostle Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 that it was a day of examination when the servants of God in his time came together because that they might examine themselves whether they be in the faith and renew their covenant with their God by the taking of bread and wine. We should do that later on this morning, God willing. So today, brothers and sisters, is going to be a day of reflection upon motivation. We want to talk today about attitudes. Attitude is extremely important. There was one so-called wise man from the worldly perspective who once said that he had learned from life one simple thing, that life is really about 10% of what happens to you and 90% as to how you react to it. Your attitude. All right? So it's not so much about what happens, it's how you react to what happens to you that's important. And we're going to see in the studies today, this session here and the exhortation, we're going to see the kind of attitude that God saw in Hezekiah, which he's seeking in his people of the latter days, which is not evident in them today, but will be tomorrow. When the events that overtake them, the time of Jacob's trouble, have done their effective work, he will have purged that people, he will redeem them, and they'll be redeemed because they will have the right attitude. All right, and that's what we're going to be exploring here this morning. So, brothers and sisters, when you come to have a look at the records that we've been considering, and we very briefly went through that boxed area there in red that you can see on the screen, about how when the threat came from Rabshakeh, how Hezekiah responded to it by sending, of course, to Isaiah, and he gets a comforting reply from the prophet. And we're going to see that that wasn't good enough. Because you see, God then afflicts him with a terrible terminal disease. Now, this sometimes happens in life, doesn't it? You go to the Father in time of distress, and then something else happens. The wheels fall off. Why is that happening? Well, you see, it's all about God preparing us for the kingdom. It's all about maturing our character, about developing our attitude. He wants to know how we're going to respond when we ask for help, but then it gets worse. He wants to know how we're going to respond. And that, brothers and sisters, is what we're going to be considering here this morning. It says 2 Kings 19. I want you to come to start this morning, because here we have the record of Isaiah going up to Hezekiah after Hezekiah has tabled the letter from Sennacherib via Rabshakeh. Now I want you to notice verses 14 and 15 of 2 Kings 19. It says this: And Hezekiah received the letter of the hand of the messengers and read it. And Hezekiah went up into the house of Yahweh and spread it before Yahweh. And Hezekiah prayed before Yahweh and said, O Yahweh, God of Israel, which dwellest between the cherubims, thou art the God, even thou alone, of all the kingdoms of the earth, and thou hast made heaven and earth. And he appeals to his God to bow down his ear and to hear. Now, the important thing to notice here is that this is prior to Hezekiah's sickness. This is before he's afflicted with the boil, because he goes up to the temple. He can walk. He couldn't walk once he was afflicted with the boil. He was lying on his back, helpless. So this is prior to that event. It's important to remember that, because God is going to then, he gives him a reply, and he's going to strike him down. And he does this in order to improve Hezekiah's character, to prove the statement that is made, that there was none like him who trusted in Yahweh with all his heart. And some people, of course, if that happened to them, would say, well, if that's the way God's going to treat me, well, I'm going to go somewhere else. And we see that happen, don't we? People blaming God for what's happened to them. They don't realise that the hand of God is at work in their lives to actually develop their character and their faith. He's testing them. And so, brothers and sisters, we all go through this process at some point in our life. I'm of the view that at some point in life, all of us are going to have a very severe test, like that which was imposed upon Hezekiah. Now, it may have come for you early in life. It may come later. God knows the best timing for you. He knows the perfect timing. And things will happen which you never predicted, you never foresaw. They will happen to you because He wants to test whether or not you are worthy for a place in His kingdom. And I also make the statement quite frequently that why should it not be so for us in these last days, brothers and sisters? This is the prosperous generation of Christadelphians who have had so much, who have peace and tranquility. We're not persecuted, are we? We're not chased around like our brethren were in the past. We don't have the Catholic Church pursuing us to put us to the stake, do we? So why shouldn't we be tested? Nobody gets into the kingdom of God in an armchair. It's never been God's principle. So He is going to test us. And that's why things have gone on longer than we expected. Because we're being tested. And whatever time remains, I don't think it's very long, be assured that it will provide a test for you. And it's all about seeing whether or not you're ready for the kingdom of God. And if you are faithful, you will get a reward. If you're like Hezekiah and you trust in Yahweh with all your heart, you'll come through. All right, that's the great lesson we learned from Hezekiah here today. Now what I'm going to do is very quickly run through these verses from 2 Kings chapter 19 verse 20. We don't have time to go into them in great detail. I'm going to quickly run through and see the attitudes that are emerging from the record. So when the letter is tabled and Hezekiah's prayer is laid out before his God, the response comes in verse 20 of 2 Kings 19, where Yahweh says, He sends Isaiah the son of Amos to Hezekiah. He says, Thus saith Yahweh God of Israel, that which thou hast prayed to me against Sennacherib king of Israel, I have heard. He's going to get a favourable answer. And then this is what Isaiah says in verse 21. This is the word that Yahweh has spoken concerning the virgin daughter of Zion, hath despised thee, Sennacherib, and laughed thee to scorn. The daughter of Jerusalem has shaken her head at thee. And of course we know that this is the language of contempt or mocking. And so what's being said here is that Sennacherib, who sends Rabshakeh, and they mock the God of Israel, they mock the defenders on the wall, they mock everything about the truth. Well, God says, don't worry about that, because the virgin daughter of Zion is going to end up mocking the mocker. And that's how it's going to be, brothers and sisters. The time will come when we'll mock the mocker. The time is not that far away. And so it was to be. Now, when you read of this virgin daughter of Zion, you know what that means biblically? Again, I don't have time to take you to this, but a little note in your margin would be helpful. You can follow this up for yourself. If you go to Isaiah chapter 47, verses 1 to 3, you will find out something very important about this phrase, the virgin daughter. Now, because in Isaiah 47, that's what Babylon is called. Babylon is called the virgin daughter of Babylon. Now, most of us, of course, we would use that phrase, wouldn't we? Virgin. We would use the terminology of a whore, a harlot. No, but Babylon is described in Isaiah 47 as the virgin daughter of Babylon. So why? What does that mean? Well, what it means is this, brothers and sisters. It means, of course, that at that point of their history, like a virgin, a literal virgin, they've not been dishonoured. They've not been soiled or sullied. They are still delicate and tender. They are modest and at ease. That's what it means. But once they're overtaken by invasion, that virgin status disappears. It departs from them. They lose it. That's what it means when you read about the virgin daughter of someone. Here is the virgin daughter of Zion. And what we're going to see, very importantly, is that this is about the remnant that are going to be saved out of this terrible circumstance. And this is important for the latter days, because you see, God is going to save a remnant out of latter-day Judah, the Jews in the land. The third that survived, remember, Zechariah 13 verse 8, the third that survived, they will pass through the fire, it says. They're going to be saved out of it. And why will they be saved out of it? We're going to show you this morning. Because of attitude. Because of a change of attitude. The pride that's in that nation today has to be removed. The pride of the oppressor that will come down upon them has to be destroyed. So all of this is prefigured in what we see here in the story of Hezekiah. We've got the enormous pride of the oppressor Sennacherib and his messenger, Rabshakeh. Unbelievable pride. God's going to humble it. We see the pride of some in Judah. God's going to humble it. All right. We even see pride in a man called Hezekiah. Because once the victory is won, what does he do? He opens his doors to the Babylonians. And he shows them everything. It'd be like opening the Christophian ecclesias to the ambassadors of the Pope. And letting him have a look through all of our books and all of our history. Don't do that. That's pride. See? And so Hezekiah himself has to be humble. He is the pattern for what God is going to do to his own people in the latter days. They have to be brought to an extremity, right to the nth degree, before they will be humbled and be redeemed. That's what we're going to consider here today. So we go on and we have a look at the words that follow in verse 22. So the virgin daughter of Zion is going to shake her head, wag her head, which of course is a gesture of contempt. And in verse 22 we read, this is his challenge to the Assyrian. Whom hast thou reproached and blasphemed, he says. And against whom hast thou exalted thy voice and lifted up thine eyes on high? Even against the Holy One of Israel. So here was the attitude of the Assyrian. As Rotherham translates that last phrase, has proudly raised thine eyes. And of course he made all sorts of boasts in his mocking of the God of Israel and of his people. You go on to read in verse 23, something of that boast. It says, by thy messengers thou hast reproached Yahweh, as it should read, and hast said, with the multitude of my chariots I am come up to the height of the mountains, to the sides of Lebanon, and will cut down the tall cedars thereof, and the choice fir trees thereof, and I will enter into the lodgings of his borders, and the forest of his Carmel. You know, it's a little bit like Vladimir Putin, isn't it? He does what he likes, and he gets away with it. That's the attitude of the Assyrian that we see here. I will do what I like. There's nothing that's going to stop me. I will enter into this place. I'll go to their various farthest retreat, and I will enter what he calls the forest of his Carmel. Now, this is not Mount Carmel. Carmel simply means a fruitful forest, a fruitful place. So he's going to take over every fruitful place. That's the boast of the Assyrian. So God has to set this record straight. And he does that in verse 25. Hast thou not heard long ago how I have done it, and of ancient times that I have formed it? Now have I brought it to pass that thou shouldest be to lay waste fenced cities into ruinous heaps. That's why, he says in verse 26, their inhabitants were powerless. You see, what God is telling Sennacherib is this. You know, you think you're doing this on your own volition, but I've actually prepared you from the beginning. You're a tool in my hands. I've brought this to pass, and I've done it for a purpose. You know what the purpose is? That I might set the pattern for the latter days. That's the purpose. You don't know anything about that, do you, Sennacherib? You think this is all you're doing. You're puffed up in pride. You don't understand. I'm simply using you for my purpose today and tomorrow. This is a pattern for the future. That, brothers and sisters, is what God was about in this work. This terrible time for his people under Hezekiah, their faithful king. You see the RSV in the yellow there says, I planned from days of old. Yep. He was planning it from days of old. So the Assyrians would be of small power, or short of hand, as the Hebrew is. And he would send a blast upon them in verse 26 of 2 Kings 19. That they would be blasted or withered by his judgments. In verse 27 he says, but I know you're a foe. I know you're going out, and are coming in, and I rage against me. You're not going to get away with that. God is not mocked. You're not going to get away with it. He goes on to say in verse 28, because thy rage against me and thy tumult, and that word tumult in the Hebrew, it has the idea of being haughty. And so the RSV says arrogance. Well, if you wanted to put a brand on Vladimir Putin, what would you say it would be? Arrogance, yes. Contempt for every law, every standard of human society. Utter contempt. That's the idea of that word. And this is very interesting, isn't it? Verse 28 says this. Because thy rage against me and thy tumult has come up into mine ears, therefore I will put my hook in thy nose. Where have you heard language like that before? Well, I think you might have heard that from Ezekiel chapter 38. Let me just quickly read it to you. Ezekiel 38 and verse 4 says this about Gog. And I will turn thee back and put hooks into thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth all thine army, horses and horsemen, etc. Ezekiel 38 verse 4. So we know that God was planning this of old. We know that he was using Sennacherib and the Assyrians to set the pattern for the latter days. And so this was to be a sign. 2 Kings chapter 19 and verse 29. This shall be a sign unto thee, ye shall eat this year. And he goes on to speak about what was going to happen in the aftermath of this invasion. They would eat of the things that grew of themselves. They wouldn't be able to plant crops for a while. Then they would plant vineyards, which of course negates Rabshakeh's dubious promise. When he arrived at the walls, he said to the people on the wall, you know, come out to me, surrender, and I will take you away to a land where you can live under your own vine and fig tree. Yeah, using the language of Micah. Live under your own vine and fig tree. Yeah, sure. Well, the promise that comes back from God is, I will allow you to be fruitful in this land. You'll plant vineyards and the produce will be there for you. But this is what I was coming to, brothers and sisters, verse 30. This is about the remnant. See verse 30? And the remnant that is escaped of the house of Judah shall yet again take root downward and bear fruit upward. And this, of course, is based upon the vineyard as the vine of Psalm 80, planted in the land, took root and it grew and produced fruit for a time. So this is the language that is used of this remnant. You know, Isaiah had a son. He had a son. He had two sons, in fact, and they are mentioned in the book of Isaiah, aren't they? And there was one called Shear-Jashub, the oldest boy. You know what his name means? A remnant shall return. And that's the promise. When Isaiah comes to Hezekiah, Shear-Jashub is there. A remnant shall return. That's a promise for the latter days. God is going to save a remnant in latter day Judah. And that's what the scripture calls the Jews in the land prophetically. The people are called Judah. We know that from places like Joel chapter 3 verse 1. When I shall bring again the captivity of Judah, that was 1948, nation of Israel, God doesn't call them Israel, he calls them Judah. Why? Because he's talking about the people in the land. They're called Judah. And the captivity of Jerusalem, that's 1967. See, so we've got those milestones in the unfolding history of the latter days. So when you read about here, the remnant out of Judah, it's pointing to the 1/3 who will survive the events of Armageddon and the Gogian invasion. It goes to the same verse 31. For out of Jerusalem shall go forth a remnant, and they that escape out of Mount Zion. The zeal of Yahweh of armies, in other words, Christ and the saints, shall do this. And so he then gives a promise. The Assyrian will not shoot an arrow. He will not come into the city. Very important, I'm going to say it in a moment. It says in verse 32, he shall not come into the city. He won't shoot an arrow there, nor come before it with shield, nor cast a bank against it. You may not be aware that that's an exact description of what's going to happen when Gog settles his forces outside Jerusalem. It's an exact description. I'm going to show you that this morning. The details are just awe-inspiring. And we're going to put prophecy together based on this history. Verse 34, for I will defend this city to save it for mine own sake and for my servant David's sake. In other words, the promises that God made to David will be fulfilled. As we see Ezekiel 37, David shall be their king. Doesn't mean David, of course, it means his son, the beloved, the Lord Jesus Christ. David shall be their king. God will have fulfilled his promises to David. And so Sennacherib was to come to a sticky end. Have a look at verse 37 of 2 Kings 19. After the destruction of his army, it says in verse 36 that he returned and dwelt at Nineveh. And it came to pass as he was worshipping in the house of Nisroch his god, that Adramelech and Sharezer, his sons, who were probably older boys in the family, smote him with the sword, and they escaped into the land of Armenia, and Esarhaddon, his son, reigned in his stead. Now Esarhaddon was probably a younger son, but he was the favoured son. He was made captain of the army. And of course the older boys were jealous. That happens sometimes, doesn't it? The older boys miss out, they get jealous. So they killed their father. But this didn't happen, brothers and sisters, until 20 years after the events of the invasion of Judah. He went home. It was 20 years, according to secular history, before his sons assassinated him. And I wonder whether that might be a pointer too, to whoever it is that might be go. Now, I'm hoping it's Vladimir Putin, but I don't really care. He's got the system there, whoever takes over from him. I don't know that you can be more violent or closer to the scriptural requirements than Vladimir Putin, but who knows? I don't know. Whoever it is, it may be that after the destruction of the Gogian host in the land, that he'll go back to Russia and someone's going to pop him off. Maybe even 20 years later. Who would know? It could be the pattern. There's a lot of other things of the pattern, aren't they? So we'll have to wait and see on that one. That might be a long shot, but we'll wait and see. So the Assyrian Empire, 770 to 609 BC. Massive power to the north of Israel. And as Brother Thomas wrote in Elpis Israel, the power that rules in Constantinople and plants its standard in Assyria is the little horn of the Assyro-Macedonian horn of the goat. I want to very quickly just run through with you what's going to happen in the events that lead to Armageddon, because I want to talk about the specifics of what's going to happen outside the walls of Jerusalem. This remnant that we've been talking about. I want to see what happens to this remnant. There will be, of course, this massive invasion via Turkey. Many ships. Of course, they've got ports in Syria already, haven't they? Latakia and the one below it, which name just escapes me for the time being, built with Russian money. They've got these two ports in Syria. So many ships. But of course, we also read in Daniel chapter 11, they come down the coastal strip of Lebanon and of Israel. Now, they don't actually attack Jerusalem at that time. It escapes and they go into Egypt. That's the primary aim of the initial invasion, a bit like the Assyrians of old. All right, that's what happens. Gog then conquers Egypt viciously. He becomes a cruel lord in Egypt. The Western powers, or the Tarshish powers, attempt to send their navy in through the Mediterranean to deal with this problem, and they are destroyed. You know, it says in Psalm 48, verse 7, that the ships of Tarshish are destroyed with an east wind. Where did the east wind come from? Yeah, Assyria. Syria, yeah. So you see, this is about the Gogian forces destroying the Tarshish navy in the Mediterranean. This is what forces them around the Cape of Good Hope, is it, in Africa, and up into the Persian Gulf. So they've got allies there in the Persian Gulf. This is what forces them to come in from that direction. Okay, so Gog is victorious. It looks like it's all over by the shouting, but it's not, because the Western powers, the Tarshish powers, come in from the east through the Persian Gulf region, and they have ensconced themselves around Jerusalem. And hearing tidings from the east, the activity of Christ and the saints, and from the north, the activity of these Tarshish powers in and around Jerusalem, Gog sends his main force out of Egypt back to Jerusalem. Meanwhile, Christ and the saints go in behind the Gogian forces in Egypt, mop up what's left, and begin the process of smiting and healing Egypt. That's Isaiah 19. It's all prior to Armageddon, by the way. The Jews are defeated. Many flee. The Arab peoples, the Bedouin peoples to the south have been prepared to receive them. We know that from places like Isaiah 21. But many Jews are taken into captivity, because you see, those 1.6 or 7 million Russian Jews, many of them, are the mental powerhouse of Israel today. And so Russia wants them back. And they'll take many people into captivity. Well, we know what then happens, don't we? Christ and the saints, having begun their work in Egypt and leaving behind a force there, make their way through the deserts. Deuteronomy 33, Psalm 68, Habakkuk 3. speak about the march of the rainbow angel coming in from the east to arrive at the Mount of Olives. And their arrival here, of course, precipitates the great earthquake. And it's that earthquake that will destroy the Gogian forces that are ensconced against Jerusalem. So you've got a picture? Got a brief picture of what is going to happen? Let's put some detail upon it in relation to the remnant that are fighting there. This is what precipitates Armageddon. We read these testimonies in the scripture, brothers and sisters and young people. The Zionists cry under Gog. Isaiah 30 verse 19 says, "For the people shall dwell in Zion at Jerusalem. Thou shalt weep no more. He will be very gracious unto thee at the voice of thy cry. When he shall hear it, he will answer thee." Now, God doesn't hear the prayers of the proud. He does not help people who believe they can save themselves. It's only when they lose their pride and realise that they can't save themselves and they cry out to him in desperation, that is when he hears. They've got to be brought to an extremity. This is what happened to Hezekiah. He was brought to an extremity. And he turned his face to the wall. We'll consider this later on, this morning. And he wept bitterly. Alright? That's when God can work in the lives of people. That's the principle. While you've got pride, while you think you can do it yourself, thank you very much, don't expect help from God. Jacob had to learn that lesson, and this is Jacob's progeny. Alright? That's the principle coming through here. Hosea 14 verses 1 to 3 say this, "O Israel, return unto Yahweh thy God, for thou hast fallen by thine iniquity. Take with you words, and turn to Yahweh. Say unto him, take away all iniquity, and receive us graciously. So will we render the calves of our lips, the sacrifice of praise," it's referring to. "Asher should be Assyria. Assyria shall not save us." Yes, we had a covenant with the Assyrians, but they're now attacking us. They're not going to save us. No. See, this is all going to happen, brothers and sisters, in the latter days. Assyria shall not save us. We will not ride upon horses. We're not going to put confidence in anything. Neither will we say any more to the work of our hands, "Ye are our gods." For in thee the fatherless findeth mercy. That's the spirit that will one day be seen in the remnant that survived the awful events of the Gogian invasion. About 10 months or so ago, we were here. This is a photograph I took in May 2015, looking from the Mount of Olives just a little bit to the south of the Church of All Nations. Now, it's a fascinating thing, of course, that the earthquake fault line runs straight underneath the Church of All Nations. So when the great earthquake occurs, it's the first casualty, right? The Church of All Nations. We're just a little bit south of the Church of All Nations, and we're looking across the Kidron Valley. Now you might be able to see, you see this prominent piece on the wall here? That's the Golden Gate. Now the Golden Gate has been walled up, it's been bricked up, so you can't use it. And of course the theory is, well, it will only be open when Christ comes to enter in. You know, there's Psalm 24. Who is this? See? Well, the King of Glory. Let him come in. See, that's why they bricked it up. So here we are looking across this valley. This is going to be a very significant place in the very near future, brothers and sisters. And the great thing about this is that we're going to be watching what's going on there. Because Christ and the saints, many of them anyway, are going to come from the east. They're going to arrive at this Mount of Olives. It's going to split in two. So as they're making their way towards this place, they're going to see what's happening here. We'll see. So let's get the detail of what's going to happen here, so we know exactly what we can expect. Zechariah 14 verse 2. Can I take you to Zechariah 14? Now we know what Zechariah 14 is about. It's about the Gogian invasion. You're all aware that chapters 12, 13 and 14 deal with the same period of time. That's why the phrase "in that day," the day of Yahweh, referred to in Zechariah 14 verse 1, it's a 40-year period of divine judgment. It begins with Armageddon. Armageddon is spoken of in chapter 12, its results, chapter 13, but then you get the specific details in chapter 14. But chapter 14 ends 40 years later. All right, so chapter 14 covers a period of 40 years. It's not a day, it's a day of 40 years. So we read this in Zechariah 14 and verse 2. For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished. Now you can read that and say, well, Jerusalem's captured. Read on. It says this. And the women ravished, and half of the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city. In other words, all right, most of Jerusalem is captured. Now, if you've been to Jerusalem, you know that the western part of Jerusalem is all sort of like any other city. But if you go to the old city, it's got a wall around it. And inside that wall are many so-called holy places. We want to talk about why the Russians will not bomb this place. They will be under strict orders not to touch the holy sites inside that city. That is not going to fall. You know, Christ said in Luke 21:24, he said that Jerusalem would be trodden down until the times of the Gentiles were fulfilled. We believe that's a reference to 1967. Jerusalem has had its last treading down, brothers and sisters. The whole city is never going again to be trodden down. The Gogian forces will not do that. I want to explain to you why. It's a clear implication of Zechariah 14 verse 2. And if you want further proof, just turn back to chapter 12 and verse 8. Zechariah 12 verse 8. In that day shall Yahweh defend the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and he that is feeble among them at that day shall be as David. Now, what are you reading here? In that day shall Yahweh defend the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Well, it means that there's inhabitants to be defended. See? They're not going to be overthrown, these final inhabitants. A remnant is going to survive, but they're going to come through a furnace, a fire, a very severe trial like that which was imposed upon Hezekiah. Because what God wants is attitude. He wants the right attitude. And when they realise that they can't save themselves, He will save them. That's the principle. So we're going to see the detail of this. This is very consistent with what Israel vowed in 1967. When they stood at that wall, you see these soldiers here, they're standing at the wall, and they had the rabbi, the army rabbi there with them, and they held some kind of service. They made a vow, and the vow was this: we will never give up the western wall until the last drop of blood. In other words, you're going to have to kill every single one of us. We're not going to give it up. The Temple Mount will be in Israel's possession then by annexation, because you see they will have annexed, as we said, they will have annexed the West Bank. The problem with the possession of the Temple Mount is all over. Okay? And this is the drama. I want you to come to Ezekiel 36. Ezekiel 36 is the beginning of the restoration prophecies of Ezekiel. And the previous chapter 35 has been about Edom and Esau. You know who the latter-day Edom is? It's not the Arabs. Forget that one. Alright? The latter-day Edom, as Brother Thomas correctly says in Eureka, are the anti-Semitic powers who seek the destruction of Israel. And he says that Gog is for a time the leader, the head of the house of Esau. But when Gog is destroyed, the headship returns to its rightful owner. You know who that is? The Pope. The Catholic Church, which killed more Jews in its history than Hitler could ever imagine to kill. The anti-Semitic powers of the papacy and those who supported against Christ, they're the ones who are the Edom of the latter days. And they'll be destroyed in these events. And you can look at Ezekiel 35 and verse 14. It says this, Thus saith Adonai Yahweh, when the whole earth rejoiceth, I will make thee, and he's talking to Edom, I will make thee desolate. So when is the whole earth going to rejoice? Oh, when the kingdom's been established. Yeah. So you see, there is a latter-day Edom. There are no descendants of Esau in the world today, brothers and sisters. Nobody can trace their bloodline back to Esau, because God said in Obadiah he would destroy every one of them, and God always keeps his word, and he did in the events after AD 70. The Romans went searching for every Edomite, and they killed them all. But there are many Edomites in the world today who can't trace their bloodline to Esau. They are the anti-Semitic powers like Iran and like Russia, like the papacy. And what do they want? Well, they're mentioned in Ezekiel 36. Have a look. Have a look at verse 5. Therefore, thus saith Adonai Yahweh, surely in the fire of my jealousy have I spoken against the residue of the nations and against all Idumea. Now, it's an unfortunate thing that the translators, for whatever reason, best known to themselves, when they came to the Hebrew word for Edom, quite often put Idumea in there. It should read Edom. Alright? So this is about Edom of the latter days. So why is God against them? Well, because of verse 2. It says that in verse 2 of Ezekiel 36. Thus saith Adonai Yahweh, because the enemy has set against you, even the ancient high places are ours in possession. Yeah. So they want the ancient high places. Do you know that the largest landowner in Israel today is the Russian Orthodox Church? You aware of that? They have possession or part possession of places like the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I can tell you it's very unholy. You've ever been there. They possess places like that. They own those properties. Do you reckon that they'll allow the Russian army to bomb old Jerusalem? No, of course not. Why not? Well, because you said they'll be under strict instructions. Because the papacy and the head of the Russian Orthodox Church will have given them strict instructions not to bomb it, not to blast it with cannon, take it by hand-to-hand combat like the Jews did in 1967. Alright? It's going to take them some while. Well, they won't need a big army for that, will they? No. The drama of Zechariah 14, brothers and sisters, is in their final desperate moments, the remnant of the Jews, holding out in the old city, will see the arrival of Christ and the saints and experience the great earthquake that destroys the Gogian host. But many of them are going to survive it because they will have the right attitude. Right? They'll be like Hezekiah in his time of distress. They'll realise they can't save themselves. They'll see the hopelessness of this. So here's the situation. There's the old city. There's the temple mount here. The Dome of the Rock is that red. This is the old city of Jerusalem. This is where they'll be holding out. Here's the earthquake line that runs up down through the valley of Jehoshaphat, through the Mount of Olives, okay, through the Church of all nations. Okay? When you look at ancient maps, the location of the valley of Jehoshaphat is determined by ancient maps. See this ancient map here? The valley of Jehoshaphat. We would call that Kidron. Okay? So there it is. And it's determined by the context of Joel 3:1 and Zechariah 14 verse 2. It's outside the walls of Jerusalem. Now we've got some people who think that Armageddon is in the Jezreel Valley. Come on, give me a break. I mean, they sell a lot of caps with Armageddon on them at Jezreel, but that is not the Armageddon. The place called Armageddon of the Bible. It's here, outside the walls of Jerusalem. The type of the Assyrian invasion sets forth the details here. God says in Isaiah 14, didn't he? Yahweh armies are sworn. As I have planned, so shall it be. As I have purposed, so shall it stand. That I will break the Assyrian in my land, and upon my mountains trample him underfoot, and his yoke shall depart from them, and his burden from off their shoulder. This is the purpose that There's purpose concerning the whole earth. This is the hand that stretched out over all the nations. Brothers and sisters, there's a great lesson in Hezekiah's life. It's the lesson that God's people have to learn. So you just get that picture in your mind as we come to the end of this consideration this morning. Get that picture in your mind of what you're going to see one day. When you arrive with the Lord Jesus Christ and you arrive at the Mount of Olives, you know what you're going to see? I believe you're going to see 185,000 Russian soldiers in that valley of the Kidron that you saw the picture of a little moment ago. They won't need any more than 185,000. They won't need cannons because they're not going to be allowed to bomb it or destroy the holy place. They want the holy places in their possession. Right? Now this might go on for weeks, we don't know the exact time. But it's going to end with the arrival of Christ and the saints on the Mount of Olives. And that earthquake will destroy the Gobian force, crumble the walls of all the holy places to a heap of stones. Because you see, there's another building going to be built there, isn't there, in due course? So all the things that they put their confidence in are going to go anyway. And picking themselves up out of the rubble of the old city will be the surviving Jews who will look up and see. And someone's going to say to him, "What are these wounds in thine hands?" And he will say, "These are the wounds that I received in the house of my friends." And they will go into mourning for months. Every family apart. It's all about attitude, brothers and sisters, isn't it? It's about having no confidence in your own ability. It's about trusting in Yahweh with all your heart. But beware. You know why? Even in the wake of the purging of Hezekiah, human pride got the better of him. And when the Babylonians, who were at war with the Assyrians at the time, heard of the destruction of the Assyrian host, they thought, now there is a prospective ally that we'd like to have supporting us. So they sent their ambassadors to Jerusalem. And he invited them in. And he shows them around with all of his treasures. If there's one thing that will stand between us and a part in these events, it will be human pride. Thankfully, Hezekiah wasn't like Asa. He wasn't like Uzziah. When he was rebuked for his pride with the Babylonians, he humbled himself and said, I got it wrong. I messed up big time. And Yahweh said, okay, won't bring the judgment in your days, it'll happen to your sons, because they will have pride. Attitude. If we get nothing else out of this weekend, brothers and sisters and young people, let us take away an attitude that God can work with.